Welcome back. Another episode of Casey Campbell's video cast on the docket right now, and we are now joined by the great Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic, who covers Michigan, Michigan State, and the Lions. Hello, Nick.
Casey, I got to add NASCAR. I should add NASCAR and compete with you, right? On the largest beat in the state. Do you have the largest beat in the state with all the high schools and everything else too?
I think so.
There you go.
I think so. Yeah.
Love it.
So busy time for all of us. Of course, the Big Ten coming back last week. Michigan and Michigan State, of course, returning on the 24th. They're going to be playing each other on the 31st. But overall, before I get into with the teams, but overall, your thoughts on the Big Ten coming back, and did you think they would come back maybe earlier or later?
So on August 11th, when they postponed it for the first time, if you'd have asked me that day, I would have said no. I didn't think they were going to be back in the fall, based on conversations with folks about where everything was with testing, their concerns about just uncertainty surrounding the virus and everything else. Wherever you land on that fence, it did not seem like they were going to be in any position to come back later in the fall. But as time went on, we saw rapid testing improved. We saw, the availability for that, I should say, improved. We saw better, I suppose anyway, maybe different or better medical, reports that they got, everything else. We saw from some of these schools doing a great job, like Michigan, we've seen with, keeping those numbers down in terms of positive tests. And all things considered, I think they ultimately decided, for probably a number of different reasons. And it seemed more likely that it was going to happen sort of as August was about to wrap up. When we get to early September, it seemed like it was probably going to happen maybe around Thanksgiving, maybe late October. Of course, late October is the pick. So they seemed more comfortable with it than they did at the first, at the beginning of August. I'll say that. They seemed more comfortable at the end of August than they did at the beginning. We can go back and forth on all of the, the execution of the announcements and everything else and how poor the communication was and all that. But all things considered, it did seem to be trending toward where it ended up by the end of the month.
Yeah. So, I'll start with Michigan, of course. The big news there: Joe Milton taking over at QB, and some other interesting position battles there. What does it look like the Wolverines are gonna look like this year? And I mean, what are we gonna see out of this offense? Because it looks like it's gonna change again.
Well, I think that you could see maybe more. More, I guess, would probably be the best way to put it. Last year, when we look back, when the whole thing started, obviously it was brand new, and Josh Geddes had, that one off season to put everything together. Then, of course, Shea Patterson gets hurt on the first play of the season, and then 2 weeks later, Dylan McCaffrey gets a concussion. So you're now dealing with an injured starter, an out backup, and everything's kind of thinned out. I think what we saw last year was the first 5 to 6 weeks of that season was maybe more of a limited approach in terms of what they called. They didn't ask Shea Patterson to do as much with the run game. I think fear of health there was a factor. And everyone wasn't maybe as comfortable, from a pass game standpoint and a run game standpoint. I don't think they were as comfortable maybe as they were at the end of the year. We saw, Shea got a lot better as time went on. Maybe him healing helped with that as well, but it got better in every area. I think what you'll see now is maybe a smoother start, right? I think in theory, I don't know how much they'll run Joe Milton, but I think they won't be afraid to run Joe Milton. I think he could be more of a factor in the quarterback run game, in the run game in general. And then, of course, you can do a lot with him, based on his arm, the strength that he has to go vertical with the ball. And if he's, better in the pocket, calmer in the pocket, able to see the field, there's not a piece that you can't accomplish within Geddes' offense. I think ultimately Joe Milton gives them the best shot in terms of talent and ceiling to sort of hit all the things Josh Geddes wants to do offensively, whereas the rest of the quarterbacks maybe have a number of things they can offer, but maybe not quite as many. I think Milton, if you're looking at it like who has the biggest toolbox, I think Milton has the biggest toolbox. He has the most in his arsenal to be able to sort of fix things as they go on the fly, and sort of that's why it makes sense. I think it makes sense to me why he's the guy, and I'm excited to see it. I think it's been something everybody, right, Casey? I mean, we've all been sort of waiting to see, what Joe Milton can do. He's a pretty cool kid. Everybody likes him a lot. Super talented. So kind of it would have been a shame or a bummer if we didn't get to see him play in 2020. So excited about that.
Yeah. Defensively, where are you looking at? How do you think Michigan will do there? Because it's going to be interesting for sure to see who with changes, opting out,
Yeah.
and that. Where are we going to see defensively? What are you looking at for Michigan?
Yeah, so up the middle, I think still is the biggest point of concern. You still have, of course, Aiden Hutchinson, who had a terrific year last year, is back. Woody Pay is back. He had a great year as well. Cameron McGrone had a great year also. But when we look back at really where Michigan struggled last year against Wisconsin, against Ohio State, and Alabama in the end, it was the inability to hold up in the middle of the defense. So that, outside of Carlo Kemp and, some good reps when he was healthy, Michael and Wayne, they just didn't have much in the middle of that defense. They were light an awful lot. They got, sort of bullied up front. So you're looking at, is Christopher Hinton better? Is he going to be able to provide you more? Is Donovan Jeter going to be able to provide you more? Mozzie Smith, the other young defensive tackle inside, will he be able to help out a little bit more? And then, you lose Josh Uche, who is sort of a unique piece, but then you also bring in Michael Barrett, who is going to play the Viper, it seems, who's also a really unique player, who's kind of a defensive back linebacker hybrid. And also Ambry Thomas, who also opted out, as we talked about earlier, or the opt-outs, you mentioned those. If he's back, I think that helps at corner. But at the same time, the secondary for me really wasn't the issue. It was, how are you going to stop people when they load up and sort of come at you, on the ground? And in this scenario, with a shortened season like this, shortened time to prepare, Minnesota's going to run at Michigan. Wisconsin's going to do it. Penn State will do it, and we know Ohio State will do it. So, the toughest games they have on the schedule, that middle of the defense is going to get tested big time. And for me, that's the big thing. Can they hold up in the middle? If they can, I think they have a shot. But if not, it's going to be maybe more of the same.
Can't move on without talking about the O-line. Are any concerns there? Because, that's going to be another question we have.
For sure. Yeah, center right away. You're replacing Cesar Ruiz, 2-year starter. First-round pick, right? He was a first-round pick, right? Or was an early-round pick anyway? First-rounder, am I right? Yeah. So you're replacing Caesar. It looks like Andrew Vistardis right now on that one, the fifth-year former walk-on, who they like a lot, but of course, he's not Caesar. No John Runyon, no Ben Bredesen, no Mike Onwenu. All three of those guys were drafted. All three of those guys are good football players in college, especially. We see Mike playing in the NFL every single time the Patriots score a touchdown. Mike's out there, so we know he's good. So there's questions, right? Even if Jalen Mayfield's back and eligible and everything else, that's great. I think Ryan Hayes is ready to play at left tackle, but the interior guard, center guard is all brand new. And it will feature some older players, I think, which is good. You've got Andrew Stuber, Chuck Filiaga. Those guys have been in the program for a while. Vistardis, too. None of them are tested. And, with a new quarterback, maybe not having Nico Collins back, we'll see, new faces at receiver, new faces in some of these other areas. It gets a little more dicey. And if you're not sort of squared up the middle, and maybe that's the theme for the whole thing, I think Michigan's going to get tested defensively up the middle. I think they're going to get tested offensively up the middle, and we'll see, sort of how those interior three can hold up.
Okay, let's move on to the Spartans. Very noticeable things there. I was on the Zoom call with a couple of players, and they were talking about the intensity of practice under Mel Tucker, and I think that was the biggest thing that at least I took away from the Zoom conference there. What do you think changed under the Mel Tucker regime?
Well, we'll see. We don't know yet. That's the big question, because they just didn't have any time, before the pandemic started. They only had maybe two. I think they might have gotten 2 practices in, or he said it the other day. I can't remember. It wasn't much. A couple hours, basically, with the guys in person. So a lot of that, it remains to be seen. But to your point, Casey, the energy definitely spiked. They got a new coach, a new strength staff, new everything. So when you change everything in college football and things aren't going the way that maybe you want, which obviously last year for Michigan State was headed south, I think new energy was brought in. It seems like the guys have embraced Mel Tucker. It seems like they can kind of get with what he's working with, more or less, in terms of energy on the field, energy in meetings. They do kind of different stuff in team building. So everything's been different. And I think sometimes a change is as good as anything else. It seems like he's been able to sort of invigorate some of that energy that was sort of fading away as we saw last season end. So if nothing else, and their season is going to be such a strange one to sort of watch, because they just haven't had any practice. Where we just talked about Michigan also going through the pandemic, same thing. But their entire offensive staff is exactly the same as it was last year. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh's program is what it was last year. So that's all familiar, whereas Michigan State, all brand new. So it remains to be seen how they do on the field in terms of, kind of embracing all these concepts and executing them. But I would say, especially with Michigan in that second week, which I think is a positive for them, just play with as much energy and intensity as you possibly can. You're going to make mistakes, right? But do them as fast as you can. I think that's probably the message that we saw come through for those players the other day. And I think that's probably the message right now as they kind of go through camp and try to get everything situated.
Looks like, okay, so Brian Mulewerke's gone. Rocky Lombardi's the guy.
Well, maybe. We don't know yet. Could be.
Could be.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you think we're going to see? But a lot of Spartan fans are, one of the things that they're concerned about is how the offense is going to look. How do you think, how different is this offense going to look? It's going to look different, but.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that it ultimately depends on who the guy is at quarterback, right? Like that's number one. So if it in fact is Lombardi as the guy with the most experience, and maybe that's the case, is they have such a short window here that maybe you start out with experience. I think in terms of the run game, Michigan State started to become more of a zone team as the year went on last year. I would expect that to be, to carry the day, so to speak, overall. But ultimately, I think it'll be in year one with this sort of time crunch, probably conservative-ish. Lombardi can run. He can be part of the quarterback run game. They do have some interesting weapons on the outside. Jalen Naylor's healthy again, who can give them sort of a different piece. But really, I think it's going to be a team that runs the ball or wants to run the ball a lot. It just might look a little bit different in terms of what we're used to seeing from Michigan State in the D'Antonio era, because ultimately their best player is Elijah Collins. That's the best. He was maybe one of the most underrated players in the league last year, I thought. Did a great job behind a shaky at times offensive line in an offense that wasn't always imaginative, but he always seemed to make plays. So I think you're going to want to feature him as much as possible, take as much pressure off the quarterback as you can. If it's Lombardi, you can, maybe add him into the run game a little bit like Michigan might be able to do with Milton as a bigger guy who can maybe take some more hits. If it's one of the other guys, I'm not really sure. It just seems like right now it's probably got to be Lombardi, at least at the beginning. Maybe not, but, we'll, I think, see how things go as the season goes on, because it might not just be one quarterback. I wouldn't be shocked at all if we see a couple get a chance, as they're still really experimenting with everything they have.
Offensive line, as you said, it was a concern last year. How big of it? How much is going to change with that? Is it still a concern, Nick?
I think still a concern, but I think trending in the right direction. I think it was trending in a good direction at the end of last year too. They were able to get two freshmen out there who are sophomores now in Nick Samac and J.D. Duplain, both interior guys. Samac was a center and Duplain played guard. And they both held up. I mean, they were freshmen, so at times it was a struggle, but, they got out there they both started the Michigan game, I think. It wasn't great, but they held up. They got experience in those situations, and at times in some games they played, pretty darn well. We'll see what Devontae Dobbs, maybe, the local guy, as we all remember Devontae from high school, as this super athletic and really good interior player. We'll see if he can sort of crack the lineup here. He played a little bit last season, not a lot, but I think those three guys are kind of the future of the group overall. They get Kevin Jarvis back, who was probably their best lineman entering last season, got hurt pretty quickly. That's big. So I think inside, Michigan State should be solid. On the outside, if Jordan Reed opts back in, that maybe settles things a little bit, and he got a little better as time went on, but you're still looking for a left tackle. So really, I think you're trying to find, five guys that can be a sort of cohesive unit. They've got enough young pieces that I think, and I like Chris Kapilovich, the new offensive line coach they have. I think he's got a really nice resume. I think they have enough to work with that in maybe a year or two, we're talking about, okay, all of a sudden this looks like a pretty good position group for Michigan State. I think they have a chance. I don't know if they'll get there, but we used to talk about this all the time with Michigan when they were stuck in that sort of cycle of playing freshman before they were ready. And then eventually that sort of stopped, right? And we've seen Ed Warner be able to stabilize that. And now you go into a year like this, and we just talked about it. They've got 3 new starting spots open. None of those guys are going to be true freshmen playing. They're all guys who played before. So that's where they want to get at Michigan State. They're not there yet, but I do think they have a chance maybe in time to get there.
Goodness gracious, I remember those conversations.
Yeah, how about that?
Defensively for Michigan State was still good. Is it still going to be good?
Well, I mean, it'll look different. I think that's the number one thing to take away. They did lose a lot of seniors, as we know. No Mike Panashuk, who was so good up there for them. Raekwon Williams was great, obviously. Joe Bocce's gone. Josiah Scott's gone. So they're replacing a lot. However, it's going to look different. It's going to feel a little bit different. I think there's going to be more speed on the field, less size, more speed would probably be my easiest way to maybe explain it. Julian Barnett, it seems, is going to move over to defense and start out maybe at corner, although I think he could maybe move around a little bit even. And he's, Julian might be the best athlete they have on the team. Another guy from Belleville who was terrific in high school and right away last season as a true freshman was ready to play. So it'll be a work in progress. But I think they have the personnel to do what he wants to do. I think defensively they have a chance to be stable. How about that? We'll put it that way. I think overall, though, Casey, it's going to be a challenge. They're going to have to keep that sort of positive attitude and energy all throughout the whole thing, because they are going to go through some rough days where some of it's just going to be a matter of circumstance, where they just haven't had a lot of time to get everything put together. And, sometimes it's just about getting the guys lined up right. And sometimes that takes a couple of weeks to get everything situated. So that attitude, I think, is going to be number one. Antoine Simmons, one of the more impressive, kids to talk to in the league. I would assume he'll be a captain, and if he hasn't already, I don't know if they've announced that or whatever, but I would assume that's the case. And Antoine will be a leader for that group, and I'm sure he'll be leaned on heavily to make sure that everybody stays as positive as possible, because that has got to be number one. As last year we saw, they had those good seniors, Willekes, all those guys, and they tried to hold the rope, but as time sort of dragged on, that got a little tougher and tougher, and those, heads started to drop a little bit. So that'll be the biggest thing, I think, defensively for Michigan State, is you've got to stay positive, keep your head up, and try to grind through it.
And these two teams, Michigan and Michigan State, are playing week 2.
Yep.
Goodness gracious. What is that going to look like?
Well, I think it'll look like it always does in around Halloween time. However, it'll be week 2, so we'll just be settling in. I think it's cool. I think it's great. I think for both teams, there will be no tiptoeing into the season, right? There's no opening game against a MAC team or a FCS team or whatever it may be. Week 2 is ready to go. So it's rivalry game. It's going to be sloppy. I would think football will be sloppy for the first couple weeks anyway. We see that in the NFL, right? It's the same concept, just at a lower level. And I'm sure you've seen it even in high school. Tackling will be a little rough. There's going to be missed assignments. There's going to be things like this. But week 2, you're going to be all guns blazing with your energy, and that should be a fun game to watch, even if it's sloppy. So I think that's cool. I think I'm excited for that. I'd rather have it like that than to just like tiptoe around until you get to week 5 or 6. And at this case, hey, we don't even know with these postponements. Maybe games will get postponed. Hopefully, if nothing else, they'll be able to get that rivalry game in early there.
Yeah. The NFL team that you are responsible for, it is quite interesting in the last 2 weeks, of course. I don't know what's going on with the Lions, but what is going on with them? Is there one problem, or are there many problems?
Many problems, and many of them, and the reason why I think folks are frustrated, fans anyway, and probably internally, are they're very familiar problems. They're problems that were on the team last year or the year before. Defensively, just really struggling, across the board. Injuries haven't helped them at all. They've been really ravaged by injuries, and we've seen that happen, across the board in the NFL too, with guys' hamstrings, groins, torn this, torn that. It's been really, really difficult, especially in the secondary for them. So they've struggled with pass coverage again. They've struggled with pass rush again. They've struggled with tackling. And through 2 weeks, it's gone exactly how you would think it would go if I told you they were going to struggle with all 3 parts of how a defense operates, right? So it's been a struggle. The surprise, I think, more than anything, has been that Matthew Stafford hasn't been as sort of locked in as maybe we thought he would be to start the year. I mean, we remember, he was out almost a calendar year. He got hurt and missed the rest of the season last year around Halloween. So probably some rust to shake off, but I would have thought maybe he would be a little sharper early on. I know he's frustrated with that, and that'll be interesting. I think that the offense is the only thing that really gives them a chance right now in games. The defense has a long way to go, but the offense, if Stafford can sort of settle in, the run game's been better than I thought it would be. They've held up okay in pass protection. If he can settle down and be a little more consistent, maybe they stay in games longer.
Because everyone's like, the firing the coaching staff week 2. When is it? Do you think the Lions fire their coaching staff midway through the season?
I don't know. I mean, it all depends. Obviously, in the NFL, on how things are trending. Where how far do you want to go with it before you make your decision? It's not like college where you have a bunch of guys on scholarship that can transfer or whatever, and it impacts recruiting. It's not the same thing as when you're making a sort of a shift. So you don't have to do it in the middle of the year if you don't want to. If it's something where, they turn it around or something, which I don't know if we're sitting here today, predicting that, but if they were to turn it around, maybe that changes something for you. But if it continues to trend in the wrong direction, you can really take, you can take whatever time you need behind the scenes if you want to do that, whatever it is. I mean, the firing in the middle of the season sometimes in the NFL, to me, it can be a little head scratching. I don't know what it does for you, rather than just waiting until it's over and making that move. But I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it will have to depend if they continue to be sort of listless defensively. Maybe, because if you're 0-4 going into a bye week with no hope, maybe something changes. But I would say all possibilities are probably still on the table right now for that. But it is only week 2, so and there was a pandemic, and everybody's kind of operating under difficult circumstances. So I think that should probably be taken into account here too.
Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic. Thank you so much for coming on, man. And let's do this again sometime.
You bet, Casey. Anytime. Give me a call. We'll do it.
All right.